But yeah, so, and for your question, in terms of the last 2 years, what we've seen is an intensification of that structure, but it's nothing new in it. And it's still the same old Zionist project goal, which is eliminating Palestinian sovereignty, eliminate Palestinian existence on the land, and create, exclusive Israeli Jewish sovereignty across the entirety of the land from the river to the sea. They have intensified that in the last 2 years, but that has always been what Israel is about.
Thank you very much. So after, I guess, the past 2 years, we've seen the global response shifting in a way. How do you evaluate this response to Israel's actions in the last 2 years, especially in the West? Do you see a shift in public consciousness, or do you still think we're not there yet?
So I do think that there are shifts in public consciousness. Public opinion has shifted. I think that's without question. And there's a lot of polls that suggest that. And of course, each country will have its own dynamics. Most people focus on the U.S., of course, because the U.S. is the reason why Israel is able to do what it does. You can't do it without the U.S. And I see very little daylight between the U.S. and Israel anyway. They both have the same imperial settler-colonial ambitions in the region, not just in Palestine. But yeah, there are really big shifts in the U.S. and in other places. Now, those shifts have not resulted in shifts in policy. So we're also seeing the limits of what these shifts in public consciousness are. Perhaps in the longer term, it will lead to more shifts in actual policy. But for now, we basically have seen institutions in Canada, in the US, in the UK, in France, in Germany, they're refusing to make any serious change in policy. Though public opinion is pushing them to take a different stance on the question of Palestine and Israel, they have not. But that's also causing some trouble for some of these institutions. I think mainstream media is taking big hits in places like Canada and the US. I think more people, especially from the younger generation, no longer trust it, no longer consume it. They're turning to alternative forms of media. Universities, they're getting as well there's lots of discontent from students towards their universities, precisely because they keep suppressing even academic speech and academic work on research on Palestine. Certainly the way that they reacted to the student encampments last year, and the continued repression and outright violence that they're unleashing on their own students. These have all created some serious tensions, and I think will lead to a big institutional legitimacy problem for many of these institutions down the line. People, especially from the younger generation, no longer have faith in institutions such as universities and education in general, the media, government. That is going to have consequences down the line. I don't know exactly what those will look like, but that there will be consequences, to me, seems pretty inevitable at this point. And we'll see how that plays out in the next 10, 20, 30 years. But certainly these shifts in public consciousness are happening. Institutions' reactions to them is also going to mean that those shifts in public consciousness will have everlasting effects, precisely because there's been an attempt to repress these changes. And I've lost you in the feed, so I don't know if you can still hear me. Okay. But yeah, that would be my answer. I can hear you if you want to give me the next question, but I can no longer see the interviewer. Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question because it's still an evolving story. There's many people in the Arab world, for example, that are still not sure that we've seen the last chapter of this. I think many people in Iran feel that way as well, that this is not the last chapter of this war between Israel and Iran. I think when it comes to the general population, I think many people were looking at their own Arab states and going, thinking about how their own states are basically bowing down to American power and pushing for normalization with Israel, while Iran is resisting that, putting up a fight against it. Practicing, autonomy in the face of that kind of aggression, whereas their own regimes don't really have any autonomy beyond what the U.S. allows them to do. I think this is an ongoing story. Of course, there's a lot of long-running, state interests in places like Saudi Arabia that was in let's say tension or a conflict with Iran as well. That has been changing lately as well. So I still think it's a very complicated dynamic. It's hard for me, especially being in Canada and not in the Arab world, although I follow the Arab world very closely. Sometimes you get a sense of those things better when you are there. But I think many in the Arab world were feeling shame, I'd say, that their own regimes are not standing up against these aggressive forces in the region, such as Israel and the U.S. In the previous answer, I was talking about how states are not responding to people's demands in places like Canada and the U.S. I mean, it's that times by 10 in places like Jordan and Egypt, Morocco. The will of the people and the actions of the states are, polar opposites. And of course, these states, do a lot of big talk and grandstanding in their support for Palestine. But most people know that their states are not doing what they proclaim to be doing. They know that they are working closely with the Americans and the Israelis. Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, none of them have denormalized relations with Israel. I mean, it's a mark of shame. There's no other way to say it. And I think many people in those countries know that. Most of them are too afraid to come out and say them publicly and openly, but they feel it. Like I said, this is still an ongoing dynamic, so it's hard to say anything conclusive. But I think many people in the Arab world felt a close connection to Iran during those weeks. Yeah, these big question, of course, and I think the answer will vary depending on the context. Do I see, for example, a politician in Canada emerging to kind of carry this wave and institutionalize it? Unfortunately, no. There are a few politicians here and there in specific ridings where this kind of messaging might help them and they'll use it. But on a sort of federal national level, it doesn't look like it. In the US, do I see that happening there? I would give a similar answer, actually. I would say maybe in localized states, In certain places that will work. We've seen that with Mamdani, for example, in the mayoral race in New York, but that's far from finished. We still don't know if he's going to even win. But do I see it on a national level? I don't. Do I? I think I have more hope in something like this happening in other parts of the world, but even there, it's still there's a lot of obstacles in the way of that happening. Powerful states, powerful regimes, powerful elites can do a lot of disinformation. They can flood disinformation. They can sort of coerce and incentivize people to forget about the genocide, forgive Israel, and move on business as usual. They will try that. I have no doubt in my mind that that will be what comes in the next few years after this is over. We'll see how it ends and when, but for sure we can expect Israel, the U.S. and their allies to push forward that kind of campaign to try to make people forget about what happened, conceal the reality of the genocide, pretend like Israel never did it, that it was all the fault of Hamas and the axis of resistance and terrorism and so on. They'll use the boogeyman of Iran, in the West to try to sell this point. Will it work on some people? I think so. But this is the thing about the word political consciousness. And what I've used that in my writing to indicate the changes that we're seeing. It's not just opinion that is changing. It's people's very political consciousness, meaning how they understand and see the world itself, how they understand politics, how they understand their role in the world, what kind of change do they like to see happening in the world, and so on. These are more foundational changes when you're talking about political consciousness. Those are not as easy to manipulate as is public opinion. You can't just throw money at political consciousness and get it to go the way you want it to go. You can throw a lot of money, but if people's political consciousness is predisposed into not believing you, they won't believe you. They won't believe the lies that you're going to put a lot of money into selling. So I do think in the long term, I'm not very optimistic in the short term or the intermediate term, but I do believe that in the long term, that political consciousness will allow people to withstand such an onslaught of disinformation and misinformation, and that they will fight for something better in the world moving forward. I do believe that when a political leadership emerges, it doesn't have to be one specific leader, but like a political formation that emerges to lead this wave in that future that I'm talking about. I do think that the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza will be one of the rallying cries for those big changes. People will go back to this moment and say, the system failed, the institutions failed. We need a radical reworking of our social and political worlds. And Gaza was the moment that woke us up. I think that will happen. When exactly, I do think it's long term. How exactly, I have no idea, because we're talking long term. But I do think that there are some changes here in political consciousness that are much more foundational, deep, and their consequences will be felt for many years to come. I don't know if that, I know that that's not a satisfactory answer in terms of giving specifics, because it's hard to do that when you're talking about such long range social processes and structures. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, again, intellectual work is about those two things that I said in the beginning, which is the honest pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of justice. So to me, those are always my guides. If the work that I'm putting forward is not speaking to the injustices that the people on the ground are facing on a daily basis, then I don't, I don't feel good about what I'm putting out. I don't think that I'm doing my job as a public intellectual, as a critical intellectual, as an intellectual who is, again, very open. I am trying to advance justice. So to me, this is the way in which you can stay grounded as a think tank, or as an academic working at a university, or as a media critic, or a public intellectual, as an artist. You have to stay grounded in the daily experiences of the majority of the people who are suffering. And as long as you do that, and you keep your focus grounded in that, you keep the direction of your analysis grounded in that you're trying to alleviate that suffering, that you're trying to create better conditions for people to live in, then you've done all you can do. Whether political forces use your material in ways that you didn't foresee and things like that, most of that is beyond your control anyway. I'll give one example of that. Many years ago now, there was a study about how the Israeli army was using the works of European philosophers who were viewed as very critical philosophers, and so actually one of them was very supportive of Palestine, like Gilles Deleuze, to reimagine how they developed their tactics and strategies. Gilles Deleuze was already passed away at that point, but I mean, he would have been horrified to learn that. He can't control that. You produce the knowledge the best that you can, and you have to also be aware of that. If you're still alive and you're like, the IDF is using your material to learn how to kill Palestinians better, then maybe you should have some critical self-reflection about like some things that you can change. And that especially probably for think tanks is much more pressing and much more immediate. Things like that would happen in a much more immediate sense. But you always have to ground yourself in an honest pursuit of truth and justice, and so long as you do that, then that's all you can ask for yourself. So that's kind of what I view my job to be, is when I write, I decided that many years ago as a graduate student. My writing is going to be the place where I stay honest as I possibly can, no matter what. And I think that's what I still strive to do, and that's what I would encourage everyone to try to do in their own context, not just about Palestine, but about any context that you're writing about, and appreciating, of course, all the complexities of social and political life and so on. But this moment in time, Palestine has galvanized, of course, a lot of attention, and rightfully so. And a lot of people are starting to rethink, like I said, their understanding of the world, of politics, of their place in it, in relation to what they're seeing happening with Palestine. And how that galvanizes into a movement, a political movement that will actually start to cause changes in how people live. It's still a long way to go, but and I think maybe this question is coming up, so I can save it for later. But I do think that this is a moment for the global South to take a much bigger role in the international order. Because I see that question in the comments. You want me to just go ahead and say something about that? Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry that I was gone for a minute. Can you first just answer the question in the chat, and then I will keep asking my own questions. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah. So it's an excellent question in the chat. Speaking about the ineffectiveness of international institutions and what can replace them. As a scholar of colonialism and what I would call the age, and others have called the age of colonial modernity, which is the last 500 years or so, where European empires changed the way in which empire was practiced and unleashed that form of power on the entire globe, causing unfathomable death and destruction everywhere. To me, the international order, the so-called universal human rights, international liberal order, all of it, it was erected in that age of colonial modernity, and it had a primary purpose, which was to ensure the continuance of Western power over the rest. That was always baked into its foundational design. So I never had much faith in these systems. I never thought that the international liberal order or universal mores and norms and laws about human rights will stop a genocide. I never thought that. I wrote that in 2021, that we were heading towards a second Nakba. It was clear, based on the level of dehumanization of Palestinians we were seeing, not just in Israel, but globally in the West as well. It's clear from my, not basically lack of belief in these systems that were put in place to stop this sort of thing from happening. I didn't believe that they were really designed to do that and that they wouldn't be put into effect to prevent something like this. And that's what we've seen. And it's an opportunity now for the rest of the world to let's, be honest and just say these things out loud everywhere. And let's build something that is real in their place. The West is never going to take the lead on that. Why? Because the current system serves them. They're not interested in changing something that allows for their self-interest to be addressed. They know that these rules and regulations and norms will not be applied to them or their allies. They know that they can use them to apply them to their enemies. Why would they change it? They don't want to change it. And I'm talking about the institutions in the West, because there's a lot of people on the ground in the West, in places like Canada, the US, and Europe, that want real changes, that want real human rights, et cetera, but their institutions are not budging. So let's just stop thinking that they are going to budge. Why, if they're not budging now, why would we expect that they will at some point down the line? They might throw some, superficial reforms here and there, but it's not real. They're not interested in something real. This is the moment for the Global South to come together and rise. And I understand that for many countries in the Global South, it's not easy to oppose the Americans. You're dependent on them economically. You're afraid of them militarily. Iran has been, Iran was being made an example of course, like Palestine is right now. That hey, if you push us, we will unleash all of our enormous military power over you. And so many countries around the world are afraid of that. They don't want that. I'm sympathetic to that. I get it. That you can't just get into a war with the US, whether it's an economic war or a military war, or even a political one. So this is an opportunity, though, for the Global South to directly oppose the Americans by not directly opposing the Americans, meaning go after Israel. Israel is an imperial outpost for the US empire. It's that simple. The US supports it so much, not because they're being fooled by the Israeli lobby. I'm not downplaying the importance of the Israeli lobby and what they do and what kind of work they do and how they push American policy making towards a specific direction. They do that work. But if the US didn't see a material interest for it, they wouldn't have given all of this money to Israel. They wouldn't be, dropping all of their political capital in their support of the genocide and so on. They do it because, as Biden put it, it's not a Republican thing. It's a Republican-Democrat thing. Biden put it for many years, since the 80s, Israel is the greatest investment the U.S. makes. Why would you call something an investment? Because you expect a return. He didn't say it's the greatest charity case we have. He didn't say, oh, we just do it to atone for our guilt and for the Holocaust and things like that. No, he said because it's an investment. And I see the numbers. We get a huge return. And they do it that happens in a variety of ways, from the military-industrial complex to the energy sector being a huge one, of course. And it's not just access to oil in the Middle East, but being able to control the energy markets in the Middle East so that the U.S. maintains its global hegemony in the global energy markets. So the return is huge for the Americans. And so that's why they put so much effort into sustaining Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine, because it is their avenue for maintaining their imperial power in the region and indeed beyond, because the global energy markets allows them power and generates power for them to allow their global hegemony, not just in the region, right? So the world can now respond to American power by, I'm not even asking to go to war with Israel, just isolate Israel economically and politically. Sever all ties with Israel. If countries in the global south, if tomorrow, China took the lead and said, it's going to be China, Nigeria, South Africa, Colombia, Brazil, maybe they even can start to expand, Malaysia, Indonesia, some of the countries that signed on to the Hague Group. And I can hope countries in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, if they all got together and said, we're forming a global coalition from tomorrow, we're all unilaterally cutting ties with Israel. No more economic trade with Israel. And we're going to continue to grow this coalition to try to include as many people as possible. Eventually, you might even be able to get Turkey, Norway, Spain, Ireland on board. Maybe Belgium. You can generate so much pressure there on Israel that you're actually really are attacking also the Americans, and you're putting a huge dent into their imperial power and their ability to project imperial power, not just on the region, but beyond. And so if you insist on doing that until there's not just a stop to this genocide, but real decolonization in Palestine, you have now taken one of the biggest weapons that the U.S. empire has, which is Israel. You can actually then really weaken American imperial power and start to negotiate a reworking of the international order on a more even ground, where you as a global South bloc can put pressure on Europeans and the Americans. And you can do it without having to go to war. Now, will the Americans say, we're going to war if you do this? Well, what are they going to do? They're going to declare war on the whole world? I don't think the American people have that appetite. So I don't think that would happen. If it is the countries that I just listed, the Americans wouldn't even be able to win such a war, even with the support of Germany, France, and the UK and others. It would be a world war. Nobody really wants that right now. I do think that kind of leadership and long-term vision is right now missing from many countries in the global south, and they're still focused far too much on their short and intermediate survival. And I know there would be pain in such an approach. The U.S. would respond with some economic sanctions and so on against some of the countries. That's how they would try to do it. They would try to, isolate one or two countries and try to hit them hard. So there would be pain, but the long-term gain will eventually outgain, I think, any immediate short-term gains they're getting from bowing down to American imperial power. So this is kind of the path. Now, do I see this on the horizon? Unfortunately, I don't. I keep hearing from people saying, "Oh, some of these discussions are happening behind closed doors." Well, have them already in front. Let's just start talking about this and pushing it and advancing this path, because this kind of leadership is missing. This kind of long-term strategic planning is missing. But I see it happening on the other side. The Americans do have long-term planning. Whether it's smart planning or not, we can debate that. But at least they have it in ways that I think is still missing in parts of the global south. So I do think that activities in the BRICS, yes and no, but they're not going far enough. They're still focused on just a little bit more short-term. I mean, actually, that's not fair. Let me take that back. They do have some long-term planning in BRICS, but it's too particular. It's too focused on just economics. I'm not seeing the larger political vision. Of course, there are divisions within BRICS, India being a sort of outlier in terms of Israel and the US, needs to go another level. And I think something that includes a broader coalition, can have a bigger effect in the long term. But they have to have that clear vision of decolonization. Like, call the international system for what it is. Instead of keep saying, people are not living up to the liberal international order. Let's just say the liberal international order was not meant for us, for the majority of us in the global south. Let's rebuild it from scratch. Like, I think that kind of discourse is needed, and it's not just a matter of discourse, because that's going to show a shift in approach and fundamental approach, and that's what we need today.
Is what you're talking about in line with what you've written about, that the need for the collective need for the colonial future is not rooted in revenge or domination? It's rooted in a more ethical path. Is that what you're referring to by describing this?
Absolutely. If we are going to approach the decolonial project as just one of revenge, we've already lost. It's an old saying, and it's whatever, pretty superficial most of the time, but it's true. The best revenge is living well. And what the decolonization project, how it was intellectually imagined and conceptualized throughout the 20th century by giants like Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, C.L.R. James, Edward Said, and many others, is a reinvention of the world, not to copy what the European empires did, not to build what they have told us to build, but to reimagine what social and political and cultural and economic life, legal life ought to look like. What systems do we want to live under that will be different and an alternative to the way the European empires tried to force on us across the world, to basically advance collective well-being, not just individual self-interest and chasing money and gathering and accumulating all the material things and that kind of these kinds of values, but rather to advance the well-being of the collective, of as many people as possible, to reimagine how we build our social and political life, and to what it means to be human, and so on. So I do think that still needs to be the focus of any decolonization project. The world we exist in today is not a world that works for the majority of people around the world. And therefore, decolonization must mean building a different world under new standards, new institutions. And it doesn't have to be like destroy the International Court of Justice and build a new one. You can, but fundamentally change these things and how they're run. Democratize the world order. As opposed to trying to replace the American empire with a new empire. Multilateralism above unilateralism, and the notion of one superpower or two superpower powers running the world, but rather a multilateral and multinational institutions. So all of that needs some deep rethinking, deep restructuring, and I think an active and leadership role from the global south.
Do you see Iran as a potential leader of this sort of reform that you're talking about, or no?
I mean, I think that Iran could be part of a leadership. And I think I mentioned that earlier when people ask about political leaders. I think we still think about leadership as too much centered on an individual or one country. If we do that, we're right back to the notion of a superpower. I think we need leadership groups. So when I say the leadership of the global South, I mean a whole host of countries getting together and forming leadership. And Iran could certainly be part of that leadership group. And then, so, it could certainly, of course, join that coalition that I was referring to.
Yes.
Of course, Iran it would not have to cut ties. They're already not there. But not every country joining such a coalition needs to already have ties with Israel. But just to say that we are the majority of the world saying this. So I certainly think that Iran can and should be part of such a leadership group, working with the others that already do have ties, such as China, Morocco, Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa still has ties, Colombia, Brazil, Turkey, they still have ties. They still haven't severed. They've severed some, but not all of them. So I do think that Iran can be part of such a leadership group and play a role in advancing multilateralism. And we do need that from as many countries as possible. So yes, and maybe Iran can play a role in initial formation of such a group of leadership. Like I said, I mean, the Hague Group is already doing some of that work, and they are trying to form it by September 20th, I believe the deadline is. And I do think that we need to drop this whole idea that we have a lot in the global South, where we go, oh, well, if this country is included, then we'll just be dismissed by the West. Guess what? The West is going to dismiss you no matter what. The West already dismisses you. So there's always this talk is like, well, is it much of a win if Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela are in the group? Nobody likes them anyway. People will think this is just like, not nobody, but you know what I mean? Nobody in the West, Western institutions like them and blah, blah, blah. No, include all those countries. Again, they're gonna attack any such formation anyway, like they're doing with the Hague Group anyway. So I'm less concerned about getting France on board and more concerned about getting as many of the global South on board, heading towards a decolonial future. If the global South does that, that will force Western European countries first to reconsider, and then eventually, I mean, if they start to turn, then that will put so much pressure on the U.S. that they would start to lose their material strength as well, with Palestine being decolonized. So they would lose a huge material strength. So. There's risks, there's uncertainties, there's pain and suffering. But guess what? We already have all those things on now anyway. So why don't we direct that towards a path that can give an alternative future, which will be eventually, by the way, better for Europeans, for Israelis, for Americans, for Canadians, eventually for the majority of people within those nations as well. It will be a better future for them.
Hopefully. We'll get there. I'm going to ask one last question, and I'm going to see if anyone else has any questions for you. I don't want to keep you very long. I want to ask, what thinkers or what writers are you very do you find most interesting, or do you think have shaped your approach specifically to the struggle, the Palestinian struggle?
Yeah, I mean, I named a few just a minute ago. Those are huge influences. CLR James, I'll repeat them. M.A. there, Frantz Fanon, Edward Said, other Palestinian scholars like Joseph Mas'ad, Noura Erakat, Nahla Abdo. I know I'm forgetting many others right now that do a fantastic work. Indigenous scholars, Glenn Coulthard, Leanne Simpson. But also, by the way, a lot of European philosophers whose politics on Palestine and the global South were terrible, but I still found a lot of important insights from their philosophy, such as Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Hans-Georg Gadamer. These are all things that have influenced me. Hamid Dabashi, of course, is one of my favorite scholars, who's agreed to sort of endorse both of my books very kindly of him to do that. His work I admired for many years. I know I told him this privately, but I'll say it publicly too. I basically was encouraged to write opinion pieces because I was a reader of his opinion pieces in grad school. I would read how he would write opinion pieces, and I would say, this is how I would like to try to live up to myself. So he's had a lot of great influence on my thinking. Mahmoud Mamdani. So there are many scholars, really, but to me, what sort of unites all of those thinkers, even the European ones who were very bad on colonialism and racism and Palestine, is that sort of honest pursuit of knowledge. They produce knowledge for the sake of, developing a relation with the truth and justice, not for advancing their status and career and so on. So that's kind of what draws me, and those are the lines of academic, intellectual thinking that I follow to this day still. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your answer. So I'm going to ask any of the guests if anyone has any questions, or if we can say goodbye to Mohammed. No questions. Thank you so much. We really appreciated it, and we enjoyed talking to you. Sorry again for the mishap in the middle. Hope to talk to you soon, and hope to see what you were telling us about in real life. And yes, we do hope to see you in Tehran, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure, and thank you for those attending and for your excellent questions too.
Thank you so much. Have an amazing day, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.